All right, I think we're live. My name is Kevin. This is my first ever live stream, and thanks for joining me. Go easy on me today. Today we're going to build a calculator with React and TypeScript. I would say this is probably like an intermediate level video. I won't be teaching you React or teaching you TypeScript today. So I'm going to assume you have a little bit of familiarity with those. But if you do, then this will be a great walkthrough together. Everything will be live, so warts and all. I always find it very helpful to watch other developers work. And so this will be, we'll do this together, see how it goes. So let me cut over to my screen here. So this is really all that I've done so far is I've kind of mocked up what we're going to build today. And we're going to build this calculator interface with React and all of the logic that would be required to make this function. So we're going to have a fairly typical number keypad. I have dialed back the functionality of a calculator so far, so we're not going to have decimal places, and we're not going to do multiplication or division, just addition and subtraction today. But we'll have the number keypad, we'll have our operations over here. We have an AC, which I had to look that up, that's an all clear button. And then I have this idea of a function I'd actually like to add to the calculator called oops. Anytime I'm sure you've used a calculator and you hit the wrong button and you're not even really sure which clear button does what, oops is going to undo the very last button press that you had. And then we have our display up top. A little bit about how we're going to build this is we're going to use a very functional style and for the most part immutable data style of programming with TypeScript. JavaScript of course has no safe immutability, but we're going to use a functional style as much as possible. So here is our very detailed plan of attack. First thing I'm going to do is build out the UI with React. So that'll be all React, all UI. Then we'll totally switch gears and build the calculator logic or brain using TypeScript, and then we'll hook it all together. Depending on how long this takes, I may split this into multiple videos or multiple streams, but we'll see how it goes. So let's dive in. Alrighty, so I am going to use a Create React app to build this up. So I'll do an npx, which will help me execute that package. I'll do Create React app, and here's a first tip for you. I always find that npx sometimes uses the version cached on my machine, which isn't always the most up-to-date version. So I will oftentimes do npx package name at latest so that it forces it to fetch the latest version if that's not the same one on my machine. So I'm going to do calculator will be the project name, and we'll do -- TypeScript. I hope that is still the flag for making this TypeScript project. So here we go. I must have had the latest version there, and it's installing. Let me see if the stream is still working. Looks like it. To build up the UI, we're going to use CSS Grid. I'm very familiar with Flexbox and I'm pretty proficient in Flexbox. Grid is newer to me, but it just makes a lot of sense for this sort of calculator interface that's very grid-like. So we're going to try to use a grid for this. And the strategy here is I'm going to create a grid for everything except for the display, because this is a, essentially 1, 2, 3, 4 by 5 grid, 4 columns and 5 rows. And then the display, since I've made it a little bigger, we're just going to do that outside of the grid and stack those on top of each other. So let's see. We're here. Okay, awesome. So let's open up. Let me go into my directory and open this up in VS Code. And we will start this, yarn start, and make sure we're running here. Pull that up. Okay, and we're running. And with the latest version of React 17, it has an even faster hot reloading functionality in it. I forgot what that's called. It's like fast loading or fast reloading or something. And so that'll be really nice for this as we build out the UI. So let me install a package here. I'm going to install style components to use for styling. So I'll do yarn add styled components. There we go. And I'll just restart the server for good measure. All right, so let's go into our app file and start building this out. Now, the first problem I see is I must not have used the right flag to generate a TypeScript project. So, because I have all JavaScript files in here. So create React app TypeScript. Template TypeScript. Blah. Okay, we'll start that over. We'll blow away our calculator directory here and try that again. I told you this was live. Okay, calculator template TypeScript. Yes, let's try that. Okay, it is for sure TypeScript now. I'm having coffee midday. Here we go, excellent. Okay, CD calculator. Open it up in VS Code. And I will start my server now. We have TypeScript files, yes. Gonna wait for this page to fully load, make sure everything's good. Excellent. Okay, so let's just edit something. Calculator. Hit save. Excellent. That's what we want to see. Okay, I'm going to blow away all of this. We don't need the logo. I might keep that class name. I don't know why that's... it's not liking my JSX. That's going to be annoying. Let me restart VS Code. Hopefully that fixes it here. Okay, so let us build out this calculator interface. Let me bring in Figma somehow. Bring that down here. Figma doesn't go very small. Okay, we'll leave that here. So I think what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and leave the app component pretty lean here and call in a calculator component that will house this calculator as a whole. And then I'll probably create a button component to render all these buttons. And I did pull up a cheat sheet for myself as far as CSS grid goes because I'm not as proficient in that, just so we can make sure we have all the proper properties. Okay, so I'm going to make a new file, and one really cool trick in VS Code, if you don't know it, is you can make folders and files at the same time. So I'm gonna make my components folder, and then you can just do a slash and make a calculator.tsx. Great. So I will actually have snippets set up, but they're under JavaScript, so I'll type all this out. So import React from React. Okay, great. And we'll do a calculator. And I'm going to go ahead and start typing this a little bit. So React function component. We'll add props as we go here. And then we'll return just a div that says calculator component, just so we can make sure that this is working. And then from here, I'm going to import that component. I need to export it on the previous page. I don't know why that is yelling at me. Argument for JSX must be preserve React Native React. I wonder if I make this React, if it will be happy with me. Argument for JSX must be preserve React Native React. No quick fixes. That's weird. Okay, since I changed this, I am gonna restart VS Code one more time. This is what happens when you try to do things live, I guess. We'll import that and save before I go. Now that's not complaining at me. And this isn't either. Okay, I won't restart anything. Okay, we have our main app component. Okay, we're going now. We have our main app component. It is essentially just bringing in calculator, just so I can keep the app component clean. Then we have our calculator component, and that is rendering calculator comp into the screen. So now we can start implementing the UI here. So I'm kind of glad that I mocked this up a little bit, because now I can go in here and just pull colors and whatnot as we go. So the first thing I will do is let's build up some sort of container. And I do I have a, okay. I don't have a snippet for this, and I'm going to be adding style components all along the way. So let's go in and create a snippet for this. I have one that I use in JavaScript quite a bit, and so I want to copy that same thing into TypeScript. TypeScript React. Let me open up my JavaScript one first, and here's the one that I want to use. And let me pull up snippets, configure TypeScript React, and then add in this snippet. So what this snippet is going to do is if I type in STY for like the beginning of style, then it will add this line, const, and then a placeholder where I can type in a name, style.div, and bring me into, if I hit tab, bring me down to the next line. So let me save that and I will demonstrate that here. So we just created a snippet for STY, so I can hit tab. That's inserted our code here. And so I'm gonna do container. Container is just typically the name I use for the topmost component or topmost div within a component. So we have container here, and I'll do background, and I will insert this color. Now I just remember that since we had to reinitialize create React app to get TypeScript working, I haven't installed styled components yet. So let me flip over to my terminal and do a yarn add styled components. And I'll restart my server for good measure. That may not be required in create React app, I'm not sure. And then I'm going to import styled from styled components. And we will add container as our containing element. And JSX is mad at me again. That flipped back. See if we can get this working here. Okay, that's calculated. Let me save this. Cannot find declaration file for module styled components. Alrighty, so this happens in TypeScript if the package wasn't natively created in TypeScript or if they didn't add type declarations within their package. So what you can do for most popular packages out there is also add a package from a group or a repo called definitely typed. And so we'll do yarn add at types / the name of our package, style components. And I really just need this in development, so I will do a --dev here. And maybe this time we'll test if we don't have to restart create React app server. I think I will. Well, let me save. Okay, that did work. Okay, excellent. Okay, so we've initialized create React app for TypeScript. We've installed style components. We've installed at types / style components. I have jiggled the wire on TypeScript here. I'm not sure what's going on here. I probably have to research that later, but it's not complaining at me right now. So let us keep building. Since this is, let's see, so this is calculator component. I'm thinking about how to get this completely filling the browser here. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to set this calculator component to a flex of 1. And I'm going to assume that it's going to be inserted in a Flexbox environment. So what do I mean by that? If I pull up my app component here, I am also going to create a component within the app component called container, which will be my main global container for the whole app. And so I'm going to make this a display of flex, and I'm going to manually set the height and width on this. So I will do actually min height of 100 VH, that's 100% of the viewport height. And I'm going to set the width to be 100% VW. And we'll add in, we'll import styled there. We will wrap the calculator component in our container component. And we got mostly there. Okay, maybe I don't need the width at all. Oh yes, I do. Okay, so what's happening here is, this is fine. What's happening here is it's not stretching in the proper way. So I want to make sure that the flex direction here is actually a column. I'm going to comment out width for now. I'm going to make sure that the flex direction is a column, because anytime I'm adding components to this container, I want that to go from top to bottom. So I'm going to make sure this is a column. Hit save here. It flipped back. It looks visually like it did at the beginning, but we're going to fix that here shortly. So if I add components to this layout, then they will add in on top of each other. So let me inspect this and let's see if we can make a little sense of this. So we have our main div. This is our app container div. And this is, as you can see, filling the screen. And then if we go here, then this is not filling the screen. And I actually think what happened is I didn't save with the flex one here. So now with the flex one, this means that it will take up all of the space since it is the only component within this container. There are a lot more things to say about that, but this is not a Flexbox video, so we're just going to continue on there. Let's start building up our buttons. These buttons are 80, that one's different. These buttons are 80 by 80 by default. So what we're going to do is in the calculator component here, we're going to make this calculator a grid, but like I said, we're only going to do the grid for all of the buttons here. The display we're going to do a little bit differently. So I'm going to create a component called grid, and we'll do a display grid and start adding in buttons there. So let me go ahead so that we can see something. Let me go ahead and create a calculator button component here. This is a very simple app, so we're just going to call this button. Import React from React. I should probably stop and make a snippet for this, but we won't right now. We will make this a button tag, but I'm going to style it. So let's do a styled button. And then for the contents of this button, you could do this two ways. You could either pass in children and add the children for this, or you could make a prop for this. That's going to be a stylistic decision on your part. I think what I'm going to do here is create a prop called label and add that in here. So I'm going to make sure that this is a button. I'm going to make sure that styled components is imported. And for now, we'll get to props in a moment, but let's just add this as 1. And then we will export default button. There we go. And I'm going to drag this below so we can keep that visible right now. I'm going to hide my left panel. So let us, in our main calculator component here, let's add a grid. By the way, I use Prettier for formatting quite liberally, so sometimes I'll just type a mess and hit save and it'll reformat for me. Then let me add a button that will import for me. And we don't need any props right now, so let me save. That'll reformat nicely. And we should be on our way. Excellent. Here we go. So great, there we go. So calculator component, we don't need this label anymore. I'm gonna get rid of that. And we're going to be left with this one button. Now, there are a couple of different things here. You might initially think, well, I will set the button width and height to 80 pixels here. But I think that with the grid, since we're going to be defining the size of the grid in the grid itself, I think we won't have to actually attach a size to the button component itself. So let me go into the grid here. And this is where I'm going to pull in my grid cheat sheet I pulled up before we started here. And essentially to start a grid, you need two things. You need display grid, and then you need to, well, technically that may be the only thing you need, but we're going to make sure that we are defining how big each of our rows and columns are. And then we need to manually say where the button placement goes. So we'll take this in a couple of different steps. Let's first add in the sizing for our columns. Like I said, the buttons are 80 by 80. So I'm going to program that into the grid here to make each cell of the grid 80 by 80. And since that's going to repeat, there's a really nice function in grid for repeating things. So if I look at my design, we have 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, don't count the display right now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. So that's what we're going to do. So up in our grid, we're going to say grid template columns. We'll repeat, 4 columns of 80 pixels. Hope this works. And then for rows, same thing, but there will be 5 rows. So if I hit save, will this work? Yes. Okay, excellent. Excellent. Okay, so that's a button 1. Let me add a couple of buttons in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I hit save, then there we go. We're getting closer. We're starting to have a grid of buttons here. This is exciting. Alrighty, let's do something simple. Let's add in a label here. And like I said, you could make this the children of the button. I think in my case, I'm gonna add in a label prop so I can specify what I'm wanting here. I think just stylistically in the code too, I might prefer to see an attribute called label here. But again, that would be up to you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define this in the button component. And since we're using TypeScript, I'm going to make sure that we're adding the proper prop types for that. So I'm going to create a type in button called props. It doesn't really need to be a complicated name. You could call it button props, but I'm going to name this all props for now. And let's add a label and make it a string. And now that we have this type, we can pass that into React.function component to say that these are the props we are expecting for this component. And you can see instantly when I did that, all of these buttons up here in my calculator component turn red because they are no longer valid. They're not passing in all of the proper and expected types. So let me finish this up down here. So let's pull in our label. We will display that here, and that's all I need in the button component. Now we need to add in these labels up here in our calculator grid. So I'm going to do, on Mac, it's option select, or option drag, and do a column select here. So I can type in label everywhere, and we will go down and add in all of the numbers. And I'm doing these in reverse order, kind of like is on your number pad. Hit save here. Fail. Okay. Oh, let me save all. I didn't save the button component. There we go. Okay, so we have 9 buttons. They're not in the right order. They're not in the right place. That's okay. We're getting closer. This is looking better. Let me style these real fast, the buttons themselves, just to make things a little prettier. And then we'll go and worry about actually placing these in the proper place on the grid. So let me come in here and pull whatever random orange I chose earlier. That's on the rectangle. And we have a couple of different button colors here. We have 2. We'll worry about that later too. So let me pull in my button here, the color. We'll do the background color of our button will be this color. And then we also have a border radius on those. And let me see what that is. Border radius of 8 pixels. Great. Let me do a border radius of 8 pixels. Now, by default, the browser brings in button styling, so that's why we have these borders on here. And in fact, that is my dev tools. If I zoom in on this, if you couldn't see it before, you can see that I have all of these borders on my buttons here. So let me do first a border of none, and then immediately in the line, well, radius doesn't overwrite that, but I'm gonna do a border of none so we can get rid of all those borders. Excellent. Now let's deal with the space in between these. Some of you might immediately think to go to margin because that is the space that's the space outside of a box. However, since we're using grid here, CSS grid, they have an awesome attribute called gap. And gap to me is probably one of the most exciting parts of CSS grid because I wish we had this in Flexbox. Whenever you add, well, we don't have gap at all in Flexbox, but whenever you add a margin in something in Flexbox, say you have 3 things all in a row. Let me cut over here. If you add a margin in Flexbox, say you have 3 things all in a row, that margin is going to be added to the leftmost and the rightmost side because you're adding it to all of the items. But so many times when you're laying things out, you don't want any margin on the left and right sides because other components within the structure are taking care of that. So let's use the CSS grid gap, which only does spacing in between grid items and not anywhere outside. So in the grid here, grid gap, there we go. And I happen to know that I put 10 pixels of gap between everything. So without having to add a margin, there we go. We have a grid gap of 10 pixels. I've really zoomed in on my browser here so you can see that. But you can see that around the edges, we're still butting right up against the edges here. And that's actually a great thing right now because that means our gap's working. It's only applying to inside of the items. We can worry about the overall placement of the grid somewhere else. So let me zoom out a little bit here. And in my interface, I am showing here that we're kind of centering this on the page. So let me see how we can do that. I think what I'm going to do here is I want the calculator component to only worry about itself, not its placement on the page. So I will have the app component actually worry about that. And that's going to allow me to do yet another thing is I'm going to be able to, on the calculator component, remove this flex one because I don't need it to stretch and take up all of the space. So I just saved that, and you can see nothing happened there. Except that now this, that's interesting. Okay, so I put the background on the calculator component. I really shouldn't have done that. I should put that on the app component because this is more of our app background. That's why. That's why the background did that. So I shouldn't need this flex one anymore. I've saved all that, so now this looks the same, but I want everything in the center. So I'm going to put the app component, which contains calculator, in charge of centering everything on the screen here. And we'll once again do that with Flexbox. So we will use align items and justify content to get all of this centered. So we are in a flex column right now. So I'm probably going to get this wrong live, but we're in a flex column right now. So if I do align items, that should center it vertically. Let's see if I'm right. Nope. Okay, well, there we go. I knew it was going to be both. Line items and justify. Now I'm seeing both items and content. I think it's content, but I'm second guessing myself. Okay, it's content. There we go. So with align, man, I knew that I was going to get that wrong. With align items and justify content, we've both horizontally and vertically centered this thing now. We're getting a step closer. Now that we have our buttons, actually, real fast, let me change this font size. What font size is this? This is font size 24 pixels. Let me change that in the button. Font size, I just use pixels for font sizes. Everyone has their own opinion there. There we go, bigger font. Now let's worry about the placement of these buttons. And this is really what I had to look up as far as CSS Grid goes. Because Grid has a lot of interesting ways to place things within a grid. And one of the ways is literally hand-picking which cells these buttons go into. When I was thinking about doing this video, part of me thought, well, maybe I'll just put this in a table because it is a table of buttons. But we can see by avoiding the table, looking at our calculator component right here, it's very clean. Not a lot of DOM here. I don't have to worry about a bunch of rows and columns, and it'd be pretty easy to move things around if I wanted. So we're going to use the capability of CSS Grid in order to hand place each of these buttons. And we will start, let me add two more buttons real fast. I'm gonna add the AC and the oops. And if you missed the beginning of this live stream, I'll explain what oops is again later. I probably didn't even explain it very much in the beginning. So let me add two more buttons, AC and oops. Okay, great. just so I can get the ones that are at the top of this. And once again, we're not going to make the display part of the grid. So let me pull over my grid cheat sheet here. I'm using the one on CSS Tricks. That just happened to be the one that came up first in Google. And one thing you can do here is assign a grid column start, grid column end, grid row start, and grid row end. And so using those, using those on an item inside the grid, you can hand place where an item goes on the grid. And if we look in the illustration down here, it looks like this is 1 indexed and not 0 indexed. So that's something to keep in mind. And there are some interesting properties here. So for most of our buttons in our design, most of these are a 1-by-1 button, meaning they're only taking up 1 cell wide and 1 cell high. But we have several outliers. So AC and oops are 2 cells wide. The equal sign is 2 cells tall. And the 0 is 3 cells wide because I'm just not putting a decimal in this calculator. You can do that on your own after this. So we have several exceptions here. And one thing I don't want to do is in the calculator component start like hand coding or overriding CSS. And so I think what I'm going to do is actually create another prop or attribute on this component, pass it a very simple number, and have the button component translate that for me into CSS in a format that I'd like. So this might make more sense if I just start prototyping this out. So let's say that this AC button, let's say I put it at, let's say I create a prop called position. And I want the position of this to be 0, 0. So I'm going to make this prop accept an array. And we will assume that this is the first position of 0, 0. I'm going to 0 index it, and then we'll change that up for CSS Grid. So this will be 0, 0. This will be 0, 1. This will be 0, 2, and this will be 0, 3. Very similar, so this will be 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 3. So the first number will be the row, with the origin being the top left, and then the second number will be the column. But this AC button is also wider than it is tall. So what if I made a width attribute here, and I'm going to make the width a number, which is the number of cells it is wide. So let me copy this position over. Oops then will be in, it will start in 0, 2, so 0, 1, 2, and it's also going to be 2 wide. So let's try this out. Once again, I have totally made up these props, and then we're going to implement those here in the button component. I'm going to eventually make this required, so you have to say where the button goes in this component, but starting out here, I'm going to make it optional so that we can implement this gradually. So let's do position as an optional prop, and it's going to be an array, and this is going to be more like a tuple array, so meaning it's going to be a fixed size. So we will have a x coordinate, which is a number, and a y coordinate, which is a number, and And there we go. So this is signifying really a tuple in TypeScript, meaning this position prop should have 2 items in it. And then we will also have an optional prop of width, which should be a number. Great. All of my red went away, so looks like all the types are checking out. Now let's implement those in our button component using these CSS grid properties. So what we can do is build up some styles here, and I'm trying to think of how I might do that. I think what I'll do is, let me add in position and width so I can pull those in here. I think what I'll do is create a styles object, and especially since some of these are optional, start appending to that if certain props are provided. Usually I don't mutate things as much as I can, but this will be okay here. So if position is provided, then let's put styles dot grid column start will be the position's first element. So that's going to be the X. No, that's going to be row start. So let's see, hold on. I think I got that wrong. Okay, I am going to make this XY. I might have got these flipped up here. We'll have to check. Okay, so grid row start. I do want, no, that's going to be column. The column and row always flips me up in grid, because so X is going to be which column we're starting in. So that's going to be our first element of position. And then the second element will be grid row start now, and this will be the second element. Now, TypeScript is complaining at me here. So I'm going to, let's see. You know what I'd like to do is style. What is the style type? React.css properties. Hey, there we go. React.css properties. Excellent. So these are probably typed now too. Yes, awesome. Okay, so if we have a position, we're going to specify the position there. We haven't implemented width, but let's just see if this works. Okay, so I'll save all, and we'll see what happens. Boom, fail. Okay, we didn't finish here. So style is styles. Okay, getting closer. So AC didn't move. It was the first already. Oops button did move, and that's okay because I got this wrong. So X and I flipped my X's and Y's earlier. So I'm gonna make the first element X. So we're gonna put that into and make it on the first row. And since these are one indexed, I think I need to add a +1 here. I'm wondering if it's not liking my zeros. Oh boy, debugging grid. Okay, it didn't like my zeros. So, a couple of things there. I am zero indexing these positions because that's what makes sense to me as a developer. CSS 1 indexes the grid and rows columns. So we are abstracting that out for the user of this button component. And we have our first button AC in position 0, 0. And we have our oops button over here in position 2, 0. Now what you can see what CSS Grid does automatically is it automatically fills in everything else that didn't specify a position in any of the remaining space, which is a pretty cool feature there. So we're manually assigning the positions here, and then all of the others fill in. So let's handle this width property where we are making the width of 2. I noticed earlier looking at the documentation here, there's an interesting thing in grid column end and grid row end called span. So if you're used to HTML tables, this is much like a call span or a row span where you can just say how many things it spans. So let's use that. I haven't used that before and see if that works. So if width is specified, we will set the styles.grid column span grid column end to, and this is going to have to be a text value, so span of whatever that width is. So let's save that and see what happens. There we go. Hey, that's awesome. So we have our buttons up here that are taking up a width of 2 for 2 cells, 2 units, and then all of our other buttons down below. So let's go in here and let's finish plugging in the positions for our other buttons. And then I'll go back and add in the minus, plus, and equals, and we can see by manually plugging in these positions if it leaves us the empty space. So let me come in here. I'm going to option drag down again and paste all at one time. So X's and Y's. So this will be this will be column 3, row, now I'm wanting to one index these. Column 2, row 2. This will be column 1, row 2, column 0, row 2. Same thing. I'll plug in this pattern here. We'll see if I get this right the first time. This is actually going to be 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay, awesome. So we can see that since we've manually specified the position on all of these, it is leaving empty space because there aren't any elements in here that don't have a set position. So let me add in one more thing. 1 second. Let me add in my 0 now. So let's do a label of 0. This will be in position column 0, row 4, and this width is going to be 3. So this will be our first and only, I think, button with the width of 3. And there we go. Great. And now you can see that this is now perfectly vertically centered within our window. Earlier when we were centering this calculator component, you may have realized, you may not have looked vertically centered, but because we had specified the size of the grid, there was some empty space that was accounted for in the calculation of that vertical centering. So let's add in our remaining buttons. And since I have these other non-numerical buttons at the top, I think that's where I'll add in the others. Since we're specifying the positions, it doesn't really matter what order these go in. So let me do a plus and say that's going to be in column 3, row 1. No width necessary to specify here. The plus will be in, oh, that's the minus. The plus will be in once again, column 3, row 2. Let's hit save. Excellent. And then the equal sign will be in row 3. And then we'll need something new for that. So looking better still, but this time we need to make the equals taller. So what we might want here is a height attribute of 2. So we can do something similar to the width attribute. So let's make a height attribute that is optional. I typically keep things in alphabetical order. And we will do something similar to width here. So if a height is specified, then let's do the grid row end of the span of whatever height is provided. And I'll add that in here. Save everything. And there we go. Now we have our calculator buttons fully laid out using CSS Grid in the proper placement with the proper spans, and this is all really nice. And if we look at our calculator component here, like I said, we didn't have to worry about messing with a bunch of rows and columns or rows and column DOM structures. We're able to just specify the position here. So let's take a look at the coloring. And because we have our yellow buttons, but then we also have these gray buttons as well. So there are a couple different ways that you could go about that. I could maybe add a button type to where I'm giving it a type and then the button component handles what color that should be, or I could just directly set a color on it. I think I will go for just the more direct method of setting a color right now, and we can change that later. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the default color this gray color, and then make the orange color the alternative. So this is going to be my default color here. So let me pull that into the button. And I'm going to cut this so I can use it later. So this is now going to be the default color of the buttons. Oh, you know what? Now I'm changing my mind, because with these buttons, the text color also changes. So I think what I will do here is add in a button type. Yes. Okay, so let's do that. So we're going to add another prop here that is button type. And we'll do type here. And this is going to be some sort of button type. And we will make an enum Typescript option here that declares which type of button this is. And we can, so let's make an enum called button type and figure out our button types here. So we have really our numerical button types, and then we also have kind of our operation button types. If I think ahead to maybe implementing a decimal, I don't know if you would call a decimal numerical. You might call these like value buttons, because it's changing the value. So whether that's a number or a decimal, or maybe even like a plus or a minus. And then everything else is an operation type. So let's call these, let's make it simple. Let's call these number and operation. So those are the two types. So I'm going to pass that in here. Now I'd like to set a default value of these. And let's say that the default value will be operation, because that's also my default color. So things are gray by default, and we'll make the number the exception to the rule here. So we'll say that button type is an operation by default. And I guess I'll make this optional. Okay, so we have this. And let's specify our button types for the numbers. So on all of the numbers, let's say that the type is button. Oh, let's export that enum so we can use it in this other component. So let's say export enum. So on all of these, I want these to be button type. It's not going to be nice to me right now. Button type is number. See if it'll import now. Nope. Okay. We'll import that ourselves. Button type. Okay, now this won't change anything because we haven't made it change anything yet. Haven't saved all. So let's make the number change both the background and the font color. In fact, let's make the default font color in button white. There we go. Okay, now let's change this on the fly. So if the type is the button type of numerical, then we will change the color to be black, and that should be an equal sign. And we will make the background the orange, which I'm sure I long ago deleted off my clipboard. Here's our orange. Okay, excellent. So on the fly, we're changing the style of this to make the button color black and the background orange if the button type is a number type. So passing in a type to a component is a great way to adjust the functionality. We're only adjusting the style here, so this is not the best example of that, but this is something you can do sometimes if you need to alter the behavior. So this is looking pretty good for the UI so far. The last thing we need before we actually get into the logic behind this calculator is adding in the display value up here. And like I said, we're not going to make that directly a part of the grid, or at least this initial grid, because it's a different height. I don't want to mess with that. Or do I? We could do a different height just by simply adding in a row up here. Okay, I think I'm going to change my mind on the fly here. Okay, we are going to make this a part of the grid. And we'll make this height 120 pixels. Okay, we're going to make this part of the grid. Let's see if we can adjust this. Okay, so we're going to add in a row at the top, and it's going to be 120 pixels tall. So we will add into the beginning of our grid template rows, which is the definition for what is the size of each row. We're going to make this 120 pixels. Now, if I save this, what should happen, because I haven't added anything into the grid here, is these, I think, will become 120 pixels. Okay, excellent. That's expected. So we're going to then shift everything down and add in a display value or display component up top. Excellent. Okay, so let's do that. So essentially, in all of our positions here, we need to add one to the Y position, which would be our second number here. So I'm just going to go in, and add one to all of these. 2, 3, 4. These, let's see. These are all 2. These are all 3. These are all 4. This is 5. Okay, so that shifted everything down. Now I have this big empty space for my display value. I may end up breaking out the display value into its own component, but I don't think that's necessary right now. So I'm just going to use my snippet that I created to say display. And we're going to make the background of this white so we can see that. We're going to match the border radius from the other components, which is 8 pixels. And we'll do a text align of right. And let's see how big this text is. 48 pixels. So a font size of 48 pixels. And we'll use our display here. Now we don't have the position and width and all of those attributes on that because those only exist on buttons. So this will default to being in that topmost position, but I do need to specify that it needs to be 4 columns wide. So I'm going to add in the, what's that called? Grid column end. So grid column end will be a span of 4 columns wide. So let's see if that works. Excellent. Okay. Let's add in a dummy value here. We'll add in our 42, like is in our design. Great. Now let's center that up and add some padding. Looks like I have 23 pixels of padding. I'll even that up. So let's make that a padding of 24 pixels. And then we need to vertically center this. It's almost vertically centered already, but I want to vertically center it otherwise. I'm actually going to change this to where the padding is only applied to the left and the right. So I will do a vertical padding of 0 and a left and right padding of 24. And then how might I center this text, you ask? I'm going to use Flexbox, but all in this same DOM element, all in the same component. So let me do a display of flex. That will, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna ignore text align right now and we'll align it with Flexbox. So now let's see if I can get this right this time. Align items should align it to the end horizontally. No. Okay, that's justify items. Okay, justify items will align it to the justify items will align it to the right. That doesn't sound right. Okay, I'm totally blanking on what justify item. It's like end, what is it? Justify end. I think it's end. No. So align items is going to be middle. No, it's going to be center. Okay, we have this vertically centered, and I'm totally blanking on, is this not flex end? I could have sworn that was it. Let's take a look. All right, so we have this. It may be that, let me throw in my text align again. It may be because I'm trying to do this all in the same element. Yeah, I think it's because I'm trying to do it all in the same element. I'm sure there's a way to do that. So I have a couple of options here. I want to keep this as simple as possible. So I think I will, to keep this super simple, I think I'm going to ditch the flex box and just align this right and just add in the padding and call this a day. In reality, I think what I would do is add in an inner component that is the display value. But this is what I'm going to do for now, so we can continue. Alrighty, so there we have a React and a little bit of TypeScript code for building out the UI for this calculator. So that is all of the UI work we're going to do as far as the visuals. The next step, let me pull up my very detailed software development plan here. So we have built the UI with React. That's what we've done. Next up, we're going to build out the calculator brain with TypeScript. And that won't have anything to do with React whatsoever. We're actually going to build this in just pure TypeScript. We're not even going to really accommodate for clicks and buttons and all that. That will happen later when we hook this all together. So now let's totally switch gears. We're in DOM world and CSS world. Totally switch gears to building out this calculator brain itself. But before I do that, let me explain one thing. So part of the goal of this is I want to build out this calculator in a very functional programming sense. Something where I can type all these or push all these buttons and in the background build up essentially a log of every single button press. And then this functions like a calculator might function as you'd expect. But I'm adding in this function of the oops button. And the oops button is anytime you hit a button on the calculator and you think, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So whether you hit equals when you meant to hit plus, whether you typed in a wrong number, anything you do, I want the oops button to undo that previous button press. So like I said, whether it's entering in an additional digit value or whether it's adding in an operation. So oops is kind of like undo, but it's undoing one button push at a time. And maybe we could even make it to where you could oops, oops, oops as many times as you wanted. So the style of this, there are several different ways that you could build this. But I've been really into immutable logs lately, immutable history of data. So with every button push, we're going to build up an array of every single button push and use that array of actions to generate a calculator state that then we can use to display our values and do the actual calculations itself. So again, I have not designed this out, so we're going to kind of sit here and think through this together and figure out how we can build up this calculator functionality. So I'm going to close all of my React components here because we are exiting React World. In fact, I'll probably just move this over here to the side. Maybe we can have a visual reference here, but primarily this is going to be all about the code. And the other thing I'm going to do here is I might try to write some tests for this along the way. I'm definitely not a TDD heavy hitter, but I think this is a practical place to add in some tests, especially as we're defining the functionality here together and figuring this out along the way. So let's create some files for this. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to put it within a modules folder, and I'm just going to call this calc. So I'll do calc.ts will be my main file here, and then we're going to use Jest for the tests. So we'll do calc.test.ts, and we'll put these up side by side. And so I'm just going to make some comments and rough out what we're going to do here. So the input to this brain, this logic, will be a list of button presses or a list of user inputs. So to our calculator brain here, the input is going to be a list, or the the input is going to be a list of inputs, which is weird. I'll say like user input here. We probably won't call it user input in the types. But we're going to have a list of user inputs, and that is going to end up taking that input, and we're going to generate some sort of state object, which we can then pull off like the display value from, and things like that. So let me start roughing some of this out so that you can see kind of what I have in mind here. I'm first going to create some placeholders for this. So I'm going to do const calc. I'm going to export this all as one object with functions off of that object. So we'll do calc.getState. So we'll define a getState function up here that will accept things, and then we will export default calc. So this is all going to export as one object, and then we'll have several functions on this object. So let's start writing tests. So I'll import calc from our calc file, and we'll start writing our tests. Oops. Create React app, I'm pretty sure, ships with Jest. Yes, create React app ships with Jest, and so if you want to use Jest, you shouldn't have to do anything here to get started. So we are going to make a very simple test here to kind of derive our state. And there are going to be several things that we're going to need to do this. So I'll flesh this more out as we go. But I want to have a list of, inputs here that we can generate state from. So what I mean by input is every single button press. And we need to identify what those button presses are. So these could be a number button press or any of our operations over here. I am going to treat AC, all clear, and oops differently. Those are going to actually change what inputs we are pushing into this brain here. So our two types of inputs as far as the logic here goes will be a numerical input and an operation input. So I'm going to have this list of inputs will be a list of objects, and we'll have a type of, you know what else I'm going to do is a lot of times I'll add a types file so that I can reference that. Do I want to do that? I'll start in the same file actually for now. So we will say export type input type. Actually, this is going to be an enum. So export enum input type, and very similar to our styling one, we may reuse that for styling, is we're either going to have a numerical input or an operation input. Numerical will be 0 through 9, operation will be minus, plus, equals. So this will be, let's say we do 12 plus 3. So we want to test the input type numerical, and then we need to give that a value. So if we're doing 12 plus 3 here, the value of this input isn't 12, it's actually 1, because each of those button pushes are an individual action. So the value of this is going to be 1. So we'll do 12, so 1, 2, we're just building up a list of button presses here. And then later on, one more down, we'll do plus 3. So now we want, in between those, we're going to have an operation input. And let's make a property on here called operation. And maybe then we'll have an operation type. That sounds like a good idea. Okay, export enum operation type. And this will be, could say plus or minus or add and subtract. I think I'll say add. Add and subtract, and equals, which will be equals, I guess. I don't know. There's probably a better word for that. Add, subtract, calculate. Add, subtract, finish. We'll say equals for now. Add, subtract, equals. So operation. Operation type will be add. So in this example, this is my representation. This is my data for what would this interface need to generate to push into our calculator brain here. So each button press is going to be an item in this array. We'll have a numerical input of 1, numerical input of 2, that would make 12, then operation input of add, then a numerical input of 3, and then we need an equals, so then an operation input of equals. So those are all of our inputs. So let's go ahead and type these as well. So let's export a type of calculator input. And a calculator input could be one of two things. It could be a numerical input or an operation input. So first let's define our numerical input. So this will be type input type numerical, and that has a value which is a number. Or, I use the pipe, or the type will be an operation, and it has an operation property, which is an operation type. So if I hit save there, it'll reformat this to look nicer. So these are our calc inputs. It could be one of these two types. So I can go ahead and I'll type this array to be an array of calc inputs. And there we go. So those are typed. So what do I now want to do with these inputs? I could do a couple of different things here. Let's say that we have a function that takes all these inputs and generates the current state of the world. So let's say that the current state might include, well, it will definitely include the display value. So whatever is currently displayed up on our calculator up here. So let's check that out. So what if we had a function on our calc, I'll call it a module called getState, and we pass it our inputs. And then our test would be that we expect the state dot, we could call it display value, to equal 15. Why 15? 12 plus 3 is 15. So 1, 2 would be 12 plus 3 equals 15. So if I were to push these 5 buttons, I want the calculator to display 15. So we have several errors here because we haven't typed all this out. So let's say getState accepts an array of calc inputs. So let's add that to here. And then it will return, let's make another type called export type calc state. And we will add in the state here. Let me check some things real fast. Okay, we will add in some values here. So let's calc state. Let's say that the state will have a display value property, and we will make that a number. And getState will return a calc state. Okay, so let me just say return display value, and we'll make this 0 for now. So if I save everything here, all of the types check out. But this, of course, isn't going to work because we haven't implemented it yet. Now, by default, I have my Jest in VS Code not running. So let me go up here and start the Jest runner. And so this should start running my tests, and hopefully we'll get an X here, meaning that this is not yet working. Then we can go in and implement this. So if I hover over this, we expected 15, but we got 0. That's what we expected. So we've defined our API here, we've defined our types. Now we need to go and implement this function. And that's where we'll really have to do some thinking here. So let's figure out how to do that. So let's talk about this getState function. We have essentially single digit inputs or single operation inputs, and we need to turn those into real numbers. So we need to take 1 and 2 and turn that into 12. So what I'm probably going to do here is a couple of mapped and reduce operations and cycle through these inputs and turn them into something that is easier to calculate. Yeah. So if we have inputs of essentially, so if we have coming into us, we have 1, 2 plus 3 equals, these are all of our inputs that we have coming in. I probably want some sort of intermediary state before I return everything that helps me turn this into something I can actually process. So I think what I want to turn this into is operations like, so now I'm thinking through what kind of intermediary state do we want. Now I think I want to turn this into operations like 1, 2, and then plus 3, and then equals. So I want to combine these numbers into 12 with some sort of operation. So I may just want this to be like plus to start out with. So essentially 0 plus 12 plus 3 equals 15. Yeah. So we need to calculate this intermediary state. And let's do that now. So I have really come to love map and reduce operations. So reduce can scare some people. It definitely scared me when I first encountered it some time ago. But it's really become a favorite of mine for dealing with this type of immutable data and generating state from some sort of log. What we're doing here is building up a very simple log of button presses. So let's go in here and try to build up this state. So I'm sitting here thinking through, as we build up this state, I probably want to iterate through and have like a current value and current operation. So really what this is going to be is it's going to be some sort of like another array of objects. And this is not any real syntax down here. I'm making this up. Some sort of array of object, which is like operation and value. Operation, value, and then we'll finally have like an equals here. So that's pretty good. Okay, let's make that happen. So what I want to do is I want to take these inputs and if you have trouble thinking about when to use map, filter, or reduce, even though we're ending up with an array here, I still want to use reduce because I'm reducing it down. I'm reducing a 5-item array into a 3-item array. And so we're going to build this up along the way. So I'm going to, within this getState function, I might break this out later. Within this reduceState function, let me make something, I'll just call it result from now. We'll say inputs.reduce, and we'll start reducing. So reduce is going to call our inner function here for every single element. And we first get the previous value and the current value. I feel like I kind of need a name for these. So these are all called inputs, all of our calc inputs. These might really be, we've already used operation. These might really be I'm blanking on a name here. I want to use operation, but we've already used operation. Ooh, maybe we'll call those operator. Yeah, I think I want to rename those to operator. Okay, and then I can use operation here. That makes more sense. So I'm going to use F2 in VS Code. This is one of the great things about TypeScript. F2 and rename these across the board. So that's now operator type. And I'm going to rename this to operator. Great. So see, we can, all of this was changed here and even changed over here. Very nice. So those are operators. I'm going to call these operations. And in fact, to make this even more clear, I'm going to make a function that's just simply called get operations. And what that will do is take a set of inputs, which is an array of calc inputs, and it will return an array of operations. Okay. And then let's define what an operation is. So an operation is a operator and a value. So we can see we inputted 1, 2, plus, and I want that to generate plus 12. And then we said 3, oh no, actually, yeah, it'll default to plus. So this plus is a default. So 1, 2 will generate plus 12. And then plus 3 will generate plus 3. So we have, on an operation, we have an operator. And this is going to be an operator type. That works out nicely. And then a value, which will be a number. And I put type twice here. Okay, so here is where I'm going to reduce this down, and I can probably just go ahead and return here. So we're going to take our inputs, reduce them down. The first thing we get is the previous value. The next thing we get is the current. So previous and current. We'll call our current operation. And we're going to reduce this into, like I said, an array. No, actually our current is an input. And we're going to reduce this into an array of operations. So let's go in here and let me check some things. Let me look at the stream here real fast. Okay, we're going to reduce this down into an array of operations. And our operations are operator and value. So the default is a, we're going to have an empty array here. And we're going to reduce this down. And we need to tell it what we're reducing down to. We're reducing down to a type of array of operations. Okay, this is where it gets a little tricky. We're collecting each input, and we are building up these operations. So the very first input I'm going to receive here is this value up here. We get a type of numerical and a value of 1. So what we can do is switch on the type here. So I'm going to add in a switch statement, and we're going to switch on the input dot type, because we have our input type up here. And so we'll add two cases because we have two input types. So we have a numerical input, and then we have an operation input, which I actually want to change to operator. Okay. And I want to do different things. And so 1, 2, if I hit 1 and 2, I need to build up a number there. So I need to get whatever the current, so let me name previous is going to be operations. So operations is going to be the list of operations we have built up thus far. And let me get the last operation. And so that will be the last of the operations. I think I'm going to pull in Lodash here, even though that's totally overkill. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, operations, and then we'll do operations.length -1. That's the last one. Now, if the length is 0, then we don't have an operation so far. So if there is a length at all, then we'll pull in the last operation. If there isn't, and let me type this to operation. If there isn't, then we will make the type of this operation, or the value of this operation a 0, and the operator a plus. And I'll explain that in a second. Okay, TypeScript is a little mad at me, or very mad at me here. Let's figure out why. Calc input is not assigned to type is missing the operation. Push button. Okay, let's figure out what's going on here. I have really made this mad. I'm going to just go ahead and return a basic operation there. Okay, so that makes sense. So operations, there we go. Okay, looking less scary. I'll shift that down for now. So we are going to switch on the input type here, and we're going to build some things up. So pretend that, or let's not pretend, the very first thing we enter here is going to be a value of 1. And that's a numerical type. So anytime, if you think about the operation of a calculator, if you think about how a calculator functions, every time you press a number, that appends the number to the right of the interface here. So if I click 4, then I first get a 4, and then if I click 2, the 2 comes in on the right. So I just keep appending numbers. So whatever the last operation is, if I get a number in, then I need to append that to the right of the number. So we will take the last operation and we will change that up. Let me think here. Okay, so I'm building up. I may want to change this up. If I'm building up these operations, I need to know when there is an operator. Okay, so let's keep going here. So last operation. Well, how am I going to do that? Okay, so I'm trying to, what I'm thinking through is I need to decide, am I going to edit the last operation in the sequence? That sounds wrong. Or am I going to somehow build up like a temporary operation and then append it to a list of such? And I think I'm going to do the latter. Okay. Let me make one more intermediary state here. And that is like some sort of like operations builder. Oh gosh, like Java now. Operations builder. So let's say that we have a list of operations. And then the one we're like currently working on. So in this sequence, as I iterate through all of our inputs here, I want to build up a working operation. And then once that's done, push it on to the operations list. So let me illustrate that a bit further. When I push 1, that is not a full, what I'm calling operation yet. An operation being an operator, plus minus equals, and then a number. When I press 2, that's still not a full operation. I'm still working on what that operation is going to be. When I hit plus or add, now I have everything I need. I have a number and I have an operator. And in fact, our working one will always be a partial operation. So we will be omitting the operator out of operation. So working will only be a value. That's what it will be. This makes a lot more sense. Okay, let me clear some things up here. So we're still reducing down our inputs but this time, instead of reducing it into an array of operations, we're going to reduce it down to an operations builder. And we're going to start out with operations of nothing and working of, I'd like to make that null. Okay. This is looking better. I think I'm going to erase this and we'll type out again what we need. So we have a working value in our builder and we have the current input. So now let's switch on the type of that input. So that's this type up here, whether we're getting numerical or operator. and we'll build up a case for each. So input type of numerical, and we'll say if we get a numerical, then we need to modify the current working value. So we will have like a new working value here. So our previous value will, if a builder type doesn't make sense. Okay, that's what I was expecting earlier. This is going to be or null. Do I want that? Yeah, or null. So in our current builder.working, if that exists, then we're going to get the value off of it. And then you can see that VS Code very nicely for me put in this question mark, which means it will only get the value if working exists. If that does not exist, we'll just make it a 0. So I'm going to say or 0. So this previous value will always be a number. It will either be whatever we had previously or 0. And to append a number onto the right, essentially what we need to do is multiply our previous value by 10, so we can shift it over, and then add in our new value. So our new value is our previous value times 10 plus our input dot value. And if you remember, inputs can have a couple of different things. For numerical, they either have value, or for operator, they have operator. But because we're inside of a switch statement here and we're inside of the numerical case, then we know for sure that this is going to have a value because that's required by the types. So we have a new value here, so let us return a new builder state. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to say keep everything that was in the builder, but as our new working value, we're going to make the new value our new value. So I hope you could follow along with that. We'll keep going here. So this only handles our numerical case. Let's also handle the case of where we get an operator, and that'll be interesting. So instead of punching in a number, if the person punches in an operation, and let's just handle, well, we're going to have to handle all of them. Interestingly, this looks like it's going to be a switch within a switch. Ugh. Okay, let's try it out. So if they punch in an operator, then we need to do a couple of different things. So if it's, we also have an equals in here. Let's handle add right now. Let's assume that equals is really kind of a different type of operator. Okay, so let's do this one. Let's handle the add and subtract cases. So what we want to do now is we want to take the working value that has our numbers that we've punched in. So if we've punched in 1 and then we've punched in 2, up here we have built up a working value of now 12. And we want to record an operation that is that number. Now Actually, the operation gets the number gets recorded on the previous operation. So if I do like +3, the plus is actually what I type in first. So on an operation, we actually know the operator first. That's interesting. Okay, so I didn't quite think this through. So it's actually easier to think about the next one. So if I do 1, 2, +3. +3 is the actual operation I'm doing. So we know about the operator beforehand. So at the beginning of our calculation, we could assume that we're adding +12 because we're starting from 0, so we'll do +12 here. So I'm going to change up my types a bit, and this may be getting a little confusing. So I'm going to draw out what the expected result will be over here for our operations. So based upon these inputs above, this crazy operations reducer we're building, what do we expect those operations to be? We want that to be first an operator of plus or add, operator type add, and then the value to be 12. And then next, we're going to do +3. And then we need something to specify equals. We may do that without a value. So if we do 1, 2, we want that to build up this operation. If we do +3, we want that to build up this operation. And then when we hit equals, we want that to build up this operation. And actually equals may be something entirely different. That makes me, okay, I won't get too ahead of myself here. I might even break that up a little further, but I do want to get something working here in the tests. So let's try to keep trucking here. I think I know where I want to go next after that, though. Why is this erroring out? Add. Doesn't like add. I don't know why. Okay, let's see. So let's build up our different operations here, and I need to change that up. So in this first one, when we start out with 1 and 2, we're assuming that these are positive, we're adding this to 0. So in my initial state of my reducer, instead of starting with null, let's not start with null. And in fact, we don't need to omit the operator because we'll always know the operator. We're going to start out with an operator of add and then a value of 0. So that is our default working state. And what we need to figure out is when do we append to our running list of operations? Well, it looks like we append whenever we actually encounter a new operator. So if I hit 1, I'm editing my working value, the working value I'm currently working on in the builder. If I push 2, I'm still editing that working value. If I push plus or add, I need to push my previous working state onto my list of operations and begin a new one. That's what I want to do here. So we're going to start out with a default state of plus and 0. If I get a number just like before, I'm going to keep editing the number here. But if I get an operator I need to push that previous working state onto our list of operations. So let's say that we're going to return operations, and that's going to be our previous builder's operations, and appending our current working operation. Okay, and then we need to generate a brand new working state. So we will do operator, which is the one we just got off the input, and we'll start with the value of 0. So this might be a little hard to follow here, but to reiterate, in our example here, we're collecting 5 inputs, 5 button presses. 1, 2, plus 3 equals. We want to translate that or transform that into something that will be easier to calculate. So we're going to transform 1 and 2 into 12. So our first reduction is taking these 5 and generating these 3. So we're going to take 1 and 2 and generate an operation with the value of 3. We're going to take plus 3 and generate an operation with plus 3. And then equals will still just be equals. So we're reducing this down a step at a time, transforming it into our raw button presses to numbers we can actually calculate, and then eventually we'll get to what shows up on the display. Okay, so I have a few errors here. Let's see what's going on. Okay, operator, numerical, operations, working. Working has an operator, value of 0. I'm not quite sure what the problem would be here. And this is handling all cases. Let's see, argument of type is not assignable to parameter of type, blah, blah. These types are not compatible. Type undefined is not assignable to operator type. I know for a fact that this is going to error out. I'm not sure why this one is erroring out. I'm going to continue along. Okay, and then finally from this, we're building up this builder, but what we want to return is just simply a list of operations. So we will return our builder dot operations. I think that's what's going on. It's reducing it down into the wrong type. Maybe I have typed my reducer wrong here. Let me erase this. So our initial value is specifying that we're starting with an operations builder. This is saying array to calculate, reduce. This is saying that we're generating a calculator input from our callback function. And in fact, we're passing in a calculator input. That's not what we want. I'm not sure why that didn't like our operations builder before. it still says, okay, I must be blanking on typing a reduce function. Let me look that up real fast. That doesn't help. What I'm trying to do is type accumulator in a TypeScript reduce function. And I'm doing the same thing here. Okay, let me look at this one more time. Comment if you see my error here, but I'm taking my list of calculator inputs. What I want to generate is an operations builder. I'm passing in the default value, the initial value, I'm passing in as an operations builder. Let me, this shouldn't matter, but let me type this as a variable. That really shouldn't matter. I really don't know why this is not typing this. I could type the function here. Okay, what's going on? I've hit a roadblock here. For some reason, my reduce function is not recognizing that I'm trying to reduce into an operations builder type. Calc input is not assigned to operations builder. Type value. Ah. Oh no, that's working. No, that's fine. This is crazy. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, let me see here. Reduce. Callback function, reduce view, previous value, u. Yeah, I should be able to pass that in there. Okay. Ah. Okay, we're getting closer here. I didn't specify an operator on this working value. Okay. So what happened in all of this is when I was calculating the working state, when I was expecting a numerical input, I neglected to carry through the operator that we had initialized. So let me go ahead and just spread across our existing working, so that will carry over the operator and bring in the new value. I'm not going to break these out anymore. I think that maybe that one error cascaded all the way through because, for instance, with this type here, specifying the generic here, I really shouldn't have to manually type any of these. This should carry through, and it does. This is saying it expects a return function. I am returning from all cases here. I'm not sure why it's not liking that right now. Usually it recognizes that I've handled all cases. I'm going to keep going since that's only a warning. Perhaps that will resolve. Okay, so we should have a list of operations here. And what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and test this because this is a lot going on here. So let's test this intermediate state and test the fact if we can get these inputs to generate these operations. So I'm going to copy this test. And we're going to make one for generates operations. So based upon these inputs, I don't need that UI. Based upon these inputs, will I get these operations? So let me just make this some real data. These are operations, so this is going to be an array of operation, which is not imported. And we are going to say, we're not going to export that. We're going to add it on here. So we expect count.getOperations count.getOperations to equal operations. Okay, this type equals down here, it doesn't like that because equals doesn't have a value. I'm going to just stick a value of 0 on here for now. So we've saved. It says get operations is not a function. That's because I haven't saved all. Let me save all. It should be, it's running the test right now, and let's see what we get back. Okay, we have something to work with. Okay, so we expected 4 and we received 0. Lovely. Let's see. Deep equality, object, operator 0, value 3. I really want to see more than that. So let me see if that shows up down here. I thought usually my test showed up down here. I'm sure there is a way to see more of the state, but I don't know that off the top of my head. So I'm going to run it in the console because I know I can see it there. Okay, so if I just do a yarn test, that will run my Jest tests. Let's take a look. Looks like there's some React tests in here. I really don't need those. So let's go delete those out. App.test, we don't need that. Move to trash. Okay, one thing I'm going to do here, see where this says operator 0 and operator 2? Those aren't very human recognizable. One thing, that's coming from the enums, because all these operators are enums. So one thing I like to do in my TypeScript enums is set them equal to strings. So I'm going to take all of these operators, and we're going to set them equal to strings of the same name. You could capitalize, you could lowercase these if you wanted. In fact, let's go ahead and do that now. So let's lowercase these. That'll be a nice JavaScripty output. So let's run that again. So here we can more clearly see what's going on. We expected to receive an equals at the end. We did not. We received nothing. So to make this test pass, I could, let's see, go in here and because what's happening is an equals is not enough to push that final operation. But that's okay, because let's see, do I want it to do that? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so if this is an equals, I need to push onto the stack or onto the operations list an additional equals operation. And that's even in addition to the working operation. So this we have a very, it's really the same as this, but in addition, you know, right here, if it's equals, we need to push on that final equals operation. So let's try to work that out here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build up an object called a final operation. And actually, yeah, I'm going to build up an object called a final operation. And that will be of type operation. And I want that operator to be equals and the value to be 0. And we only want to push this on if the current operator that we got was an equals. I may go back and change this a bit later. Yeah. Okay, let's make a case here. So if the operator, if the input operator is equals, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to redo what we've been doing here. So if it's an equals, we're going to push on this final operation. So that is the operator equals, and just we're going to have operator equals is always going to have a value of 0 on that operation. And then on our working operation, I'm actually going to make this a plus to reset it to a default state. So that may be a little bit weird, but you should be able to see this hopefully in a passing test. Yes, okay, yes. So we have our first passing test. Whew, okay. So we have our 5 button presses. We're calling those inputs. 1, 2, add, 3, equals. that is transforming into these three operations. We have a plus 12, a plus 3, and an equals. Now that we have real numbers here, we can take these numbers and we can perform math on them. And that's what we're testing down below. So we are testing, so we want to take these operations and now do the math where we can derive the current state of the world. And the state that we need, really the only thing that matters as far as our calculator goes, is the display value. There's no other output of the calculator. The display is the only thing. So if we think through what happens here, when I press 1, I expect a 1 to show up here. When I press 2, I expect 1, 2 to show up. When I hit plus, 1, 2 is still going to be there until I press something else. When I press 3, a 3 will show up. When I press equals, then the final value will be displayed. So it's that equals operator that signals to us that we're ready to perform the mathematical operation. So let's test that out. So let's get rid of this. We have a test above. Okay, we're deriving state. We still want that to be 15. We're still getting 0. Okay, our tests are still written correctly. Now what we need to do is we're going to minimize this get operations craziness. Delete some of these working comments. Now what we need to do is we need to get the state, or we need to get the value of the state. Now I'm going to majorly cheat here, but actually what I'm doing is I'm going to follow TDD principles here and do the minimum possible to make this test pass. And then we're going to create some failure cases to handle what should be appropriately handled here. So if I take a look at these operations, 12 and 3, and so these inputs will generate these same operations. And I want this to equal 15. Well, a very easy way for this to equal 15 is for me to just add up all the values and make that the display value. That would be the minimum work required. So we'll do that, make this test pass, and then create another test so we can start handling the different cases of our calculator. And we might start hooking that up before we finish everything so we can actually see this in action and see it play out. So let me go into my state here. We're still going to accept a list of inputs, and we're still going to return a calculator state. But in between, I'm going to generate that intermediary state, which is the operations. So let me say const operations get operations based upon the inputs. So I took the inputs, I used our get operations function up here, and I now have a list of operations. Now I can take that list of operations and sum up all the values and make that my display value. That will make my test pass down here. So a quick and easy way to do that is, like I said, we're just going to add up all the values. Even the equal sign, even though the equal sign has a value, it's a 0, so that won't make a difference. So instead of just returning 0 here, I want to return all of the values added together. Well, to sum things together in JavaScript, I can do a math dot, oh no, I can't. That's always the function I want. That is always the function I want. There is not a math.sum. always what I want. Okay. I must have worked in some language in the past where there was a math.sum, because that's what I always go to, and I'm always surprised that it's not there. Okay, so we will reduce once again. So what we will do is we will take this sum. So we're going to take all of our operations, we're going to reduce them down, and we're going to reduce them down to a number. So we'll have our current sum and then our current value, and we will just add those together, and we'll start with 0. Actually, our current value is in operation, so this is an operation. So sum plus our operation dot value. And then our display value is just going to be, I'm going to name this total. Our display value is going to be total. So cross your fingers. That should make our test pass down here. Excellent. Okay, so we have our first test, which tests at how we are transforming our inputs into our operations. Then we have our second test, which still takes all of our inputs, but sees if we can get to that final result. Now, even though we've made this test pass, I know for a fact that there are several cases in here that we haven't handled yet. So let's test a few more cases. And in fact, this sequence here would be a great sequence to keep testing, but not its entirety. So I'm going to copy, let's see, I'm going to say derives final state. And let's say I want to test this same thing, but what happens before I hit the equals button? That display value, if I push 1, 2, plus 3, the display value is going to be, should be 3. So that is what I would expect out of this test. So just derives display value after, let's see, upon new numerical input. It's not, yeah. So if I type 1, 2, plus 3, I'm expecting a 3 to be currently on the display. And in fact, let me pull up calculator. We're going to make sure. So 1, 2, plus 3. I'm expecting a 3 to show up. Great. But my test is failing. That's because I can't just add up all the numbers and return that as my display value. What I need to do is, it seems like my display is depends on whatever that last operation is. If the last operation is an equals, I need to return the full calculation. If it's not an equals, then I probably need to return the most recent value. So that's what I'll do. So let's, in our state here, we're going to first get the operations. That's nice. But then we're going to switch on the last operation. So last operation. And that is operations. Once again, we'll get our last one here. So that's operations.length. If there is, this is why I like pulling in Lodash. If there is an operations.length, then get the last one. Otherwise, return null. So And then if there is no last operation, then we're just going to return a display value of 0, which is a test case we should have also. So before I save my file on the left, I want to say if I'm passing in no inputs, then I want this to be 0. In fact, it is 0 because the reduce function starts at 0. So I actually don't need to do that. So if the last operation and the last operation dot operator is an operator type of equals, then I want to return what I did previously, which is totaling everything up and returning that as the display value. Actually, I do want to pull this out because I don't have to check that every time. So if there's no last operation, we're going to simply return a display value of 0 always. So, and then we're going to switch on this essentially. So we're going to switch based upon the operator. If the operator is an equals, we'll return this. Otherwise, in fact, any other time, we're going to return the last value. So return display value, or the value of the last operation. So we'll return last operation, if there was one. Actually, I don't need that. If there was one, we'll return its value. Otherwise, we'll return 0. Let's see if that checks out. Okay, it still says one test failed here. Let's see what happens. Expected 3, received 12. Okay, that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So in my get operations here, I actually don't have that final operation yet because I have this inner working value. So that's interesting. So this get operations actually need more than the final list of operations. I actually need that builder that's building up the state. So rather than pulling out the operations at the end, I want to return the builder as a whole. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this function. So get operations builder, and we will return, instead of an array of operations, I'm going to return an operations builder. And instead of assigning this, I'm just going to return this reduce function itself, because that itself returns an operations builder. Okay. This is going to break a few things here. So I'm going to make this builder const operations is operations.builder. I'll pull those out. This should check out now. These, let's see, get operations. So this now is get operations builder. And I'm testing the operations here. So I'm going to leave this test as is, just renaming things to where that will pass again. Let me save this. This should fix at least that one and this one. Okay, so we're back down to this case down here. So we're accounting for two cases as of now. One is they hit the equal sign. If they hit the equal sign, we return to them the final calculation. If they don't hit the equal sign, instead of returning the last operations value, we need to return the current working value. And so that comes from the builder. So builder.working.value. I think that will work. Let's see. Okay. Why do we have like, oh, test title, okay. Upon new numerical input, let's see, derives, let's see, has display value of 0 with no inputs. Okay, we have all passing tests. That's awesome. So we're handling the case of no inputs. We start with 0. We handle the case of being in the middle of an operation where we're displaying the current working value. And we handle the case of hitting equals to get that final value. Now I know there's one other case that we're not getting. And that is here we're really deriving a final state with addition. But what happens if we also have subtraction in there with addition and subtraction? So what if we have 1, 2 plus 3 equals, so that's 15. And let's say we want to do minus 5. So let's, before we hit equals here, let's do a minus, a subtract 5. And if I subtract 5 from 15, that will be 10. So I'll add 10 here, and we should get a failing test. Okay, great, we get a failing test. That's because we are blindly adding up all numbers together. We're not adhering to that subtraction operation. So here where we're calculating our last value, we really need to determine, is this a plus or is this a minus? So what we can do, I'm sure there are several different ways to do this. What I'm probably going to do here is always add, but either add a positive or add a negative. And we'll add a negative for subtraction. Or will I just make it more explicit? I think I'll make it more explicit, and I'll tell you why. Let's see. So this is saying if we've hit an equals, do this. Okay, we're gonna make this, man, that would be another switch statement. Oh, okay. Let's do that. Let's create a function that is get total. Something like that. And we're going to extract this functionality into that function. I'm using lots of switch statements here because there's a great benefit in TypeScript of using switch statements. if you use switch statements on an enum, it will fail. It will cause a compiler error if, I believe it's a compiler error, if you don't handle all of the types of that enum. So let me give you an example here. So up here in my operations builder, I'm handling two input types, numerical and operator. Everything's working great here. What if there is a new input type? Like, let's say we want to add in a memory function to this calculator. So let me add in a memory type. If I hit save, I would expect, oh, calc input doesn't have that, okay. So calc input, let's say that's a memory. If I hit save here, with no syntax errors, I get a giant error. And that's because, there's gonna be several errors in here, but that's because I'm not handling all of the cases in that switch statement. So that is one of the benefits of using switch statements is TypeScript will point out to you when you're not properly handling all cases. So let's make a get total function. And what I want from get total is I want to give it a list of operations. So that will be an array of operation, and the total will just simply be a number. So we'll return that. So essentially, we're gonna start with this. So that's our very simplified version. Let's say get total of operations. Okay, there we go. This is looking a little cleaner. Okay, if we just save that, everything should work as it did before, but we still have this failing test down here of where we're using a subtract, and it's adding instead of subtracting. So let's go in here, and we're going to switch this up. So again, we're always adding here. Let's change that up. So we're going to turn this into a function. And once again, we're going to pull out our old trusty switch statement. And we're going to switch on the operation operator. Again, a benefit of using the switch statement is we have to handle all of the operators here, or TypeScript will give us an error. So that's a nice benefit. So let's handle all of the different operator types. So we have add, equals, and subtract. I'll do those in add, subtract, and equals order. Okay, if it's an add, we're going to return sum plus the new value. If it's a subtract, we're going to subtract it. If it's an equals, equals is always going to have a 0. So we can just simply return the previous value. And you see when I did that, the errors went away. So if I hit save here, I think this will make it pass. And it did. That is awesome. So we have a suite of passing tests that handle a variety of cases. And we have our calculator brain, which is about 100 lines of code, including several types, that handle all of the calculations. I should really point out that none of this has anything to do with React. None of the calculator function here has anything to do with React. So this could be pulled into some other different place where maybe you weren't working on a calculator UI, maybe you were doing something server-side, where you could reuse this functionality. But now that we have this in place, let's get to the fun part where we can actually hook this up with our interface and hopefully see this function. So let's do that now. Alrighty, let's pull in our UI again. I will get rid of the Apple calculator UI. That's cheating. Okay, we have our calculator UI, and let's start implementing this with React. I'm going to open up our calculator component and close our test file. Whoa, lots of red. Man, I don't know why it doesn't like my JSX setting. That is so weird to me. There must be some sort of mismatch of my TypeScript version I have installed and Create React app or something. I really don't know. But I'm gonna keep adjusting that value through this video and figure that out later. Okay, so we still have all of our buttons. We need to somehow use this state and build up our list of inputs. So I'm in our calculator function. I'm going to switch sides here. I'm going to put the calculator function on the left. I'm in the calculator component, and essentially what I want to happen is with each and every button press, that needs to add to, let's see, actually our calculator tests are easier to read. With each and every button press, I need to create an input here and append that to a list. So that means we're going to have state in this calculator component. And so for that we can use state. So I'm going to make an inputs state, and we'll have set inputs here. And that will be a use state, which should import from React. And that will start out as an array. And I think this has a generic on it, or I could say that this is this state is an array of calculator inputs. Yes, that works. So what I want is I want to be able to click on a button and have that input. And then the display value needs to be generated from the calculator state. So we need to get our state, which is calculated from our module, from our getState function, by passing it all of the inputs. And then we should be able to display the state.display value. Okay, so if I save this, I'm going to expect this hard-coded 42 on the right to change to 0. Yes, okay. that took a little while. That changed to 0. Great. Getting there. Now I want to add click handlers to the numbers. We'll just start out with the numbers so far. So let's do that. Let's do onClick, and we will make a function that makes a function that has a handler. So let's say handle numerical, and then we'll pass it what number this is. I'm gonna get super fancy. I'm gonna move over, I'm gonna copy this column of numbers, move back over, and paste. Yes. Okay, so handle numerical. Okay, great. This onClick is showing me red. Let me fix that before I implement our handle numerical handler. So let's pull up our button. The reason that's red is because we don't have onClick in our props. Now, I could just directly add onClick to our props here, but there's a more proper way to do it, which is to utilize the div props built into React. And I am blanking on that right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, give me the React dot, element component props for div. React component div props TypeScript. That's not it. Let's see. Components, props. What do you pass into that? Oh my gosh. My D key's not working. Okay. I'm not good at Googling today. Okay, let's look at the docs here. That's probably a better idea. Okay, component element type. Element type. Oh my gosh. Okay, 1 second. I'm totally blanking. I'm gonna go look at this in another project I have. One second. I'm gonna put just me on air in case I bring something up. Okay. Looking this up. Component props. Let's see. It is HTML. Ah, okay, that's it. Okay, we can fix this. This is, okay, so what we need to do, back on track here. What we need to do is we have our props type that we're passing in for the button. Let me pull up this. We have our props type that we're passing in for the button. We're wanting to add to that the onClick handler. Now the very simple way would be just to add another property called onClick here and add a function. However, we don't want to keep doing that for anything that the user might want to do. So what we want is we want to kind of inherit almost anything that React has built in that can go on this element, which happens to be a button. So in addition to props, we're going to intersect that with React's HTML props and pass in which type of HTML element this is. So this is an HTML button element. So let's see, I don't need that anymore. So now we are allowing any button props to also be passed onto here. Type button number is not assignable to type undefined. Oh, button type. Oh. That's weird. That's weird. Let me take this out, see if that works. Okay. Save that. That's odd. Let's see. Button type number is not assignable to type undefined. I think that probably has something to do with my default value down here. If I didn't have that, let's say I force the user to put that in. Oh, type. Let me pull these out. Oh my gosh. What's going on? It really doesn't like this type anymore. I wonder if that has something to do. Is this supposed to be component props? Do I have that wrong? You're seeing it live. Okay, it really doesn't like my type here. One second. Let me take a look at this. Okay, yeah, it's HTML. I had that right first. It's HTML props. Oops. And HTML div element. But it just does not like this type. Okay. So it may be this name type that it's not liking. Let me do button type. Perhaps it doesn't like that name. Button type is not assignable to never. Whew. Never, huh? 1, 0. Okay, there we go. It didn't like, okay, that's something interesting to look into. Once I added in React's default types, it doesn't like the prop named type. So that's weird. Let's keep going. Where was I? Let me pull something back in because I don't want to have to specify these if I don't have to. Let me still have a default button type of operation. Let me still make this optional. And let me remove operation here. That cleans this up a lot. This is probably going to error out real fast because I didn't save all. Okay, we're back to where we were, only we just changed type to button type. There we go. But now we are wanting to implement on-click handlers. Now that we're accepting all of the props that a div can have in React, actually it's not a div, it is a button. That's our type. It's a button. I need to spread this and do rest props and add that back onto our button down here. And we can't have children, so let me pull that out here. Let's see. JSX tags children props expects type never. Rest prop should not have children if I'm pulling it out. That's weird. A single child. That's very odd. Let me pull rest props out. I don't think I've ever had that happen. Okay, I am going to just add in on click here. I waved the white flag. I do want to figure out how I can get a spread of all props in here, but I'm not going to waste your time doing that now. Something's funky with children, but I'm not sure what. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and put on click here and continue on that later. So let's take all of our on click handlers that we made. Let's put those back on here. And now finally, let's create this handling function that handles numerical. This is going to be a higher order function. So we have handle numerical, we're passing in a value, and that's calling the function directly. But we need that to return a handler function. So we have const handle numerical, which will receive the number value, and that will itself return a handler. So with that handler, we need to add an input value to our calculator. So what we will do is we will do a set inputs, and we will take our previous and return everything that we already had in inputs, but add in another one. So let's add in an input type of numerical, and the value is value. So this will append our inputs, which will cause React to re-render, which will cause calculation to get a new state, which should cause us to get a new display value. So this is the magical moment. Let's see if it works. Only numbers work so far. Okay, let's punch in 1. Let's refresh. Let's punch in 1. Nah. Okay, let's see what's going on. Let me look at my console. I don't see anything here. Okay, that's fine. Let me do the old console.log. So I'm going to log every time this renders. Every time this renders, I'm going to log inputs. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 1. Oh, we actually have lots of 1s. Okay, so that to me says our display value is probably not working. So let's add a test case for this. So we already have derives display value upon new numerical input, but what we don't have is derives display value upon first numerical input. So we're just simply trying to add a 1 here, and we want it to display a 1. So let's see if that test passes. Where I'm expecting not. And it doesn't. Okay, that means it's probably not an issue in our UI. It's actually an issue in our calculator brain here. So we have a case that we haven't accounted for. Let's take a look in our calculator logic. So we have a list of inputs, which is only 1 item long. That should build up a builder with a working operation. And if I'm looking at the display value, let's see, last operation. Okay, interesting. I see the problem. Here's the problem. If our last operation is pressing the equals button, we should display the total. If our last operation is not an equals button, we should display that value. The problem is we don't yet have an operation built up in our array. We've pressed the number 1, and in our array of operations here, it's still empty because we haven't hit a plus or anything to append that operation. And what we have here is if there's no operation, return a display value of 0. That's not what we want. What we actually want is return the builder's working value. That's what we want. So if I save this, I expect this test to pass. It did, and I actually saw that happen in the UI first. So I'm going to refresh this UI. We're going to start from scratch. So if I click 1, excellent. If I click 2, excellent. If I click plus, nothing will happen because we haven't done that yet. So we're getting farther along. We're almost there. Let me go back to my calculator. So we're handling all of the numbers. Now let's handle the operations. So let me do, get fancy here. Okay, on click, we want to handle operation and operate, it's really handle operator. Operator type, and then it's going to be a, this one's subtract, this one's plus, and this one's equals. So now let's create a handler function for that. And it's very similar to this. However, I'm going to create a little helper here. I'm going to create an append input, and that will accept one calculator input, and we're not going to return anything. That's going to handle this logic of it appending an item to the previous inputs array. So I'm going to cut that, paste that up here. I'm actually going to take that out. So this append input will handle taking an input, appending it. And so now I'm going to use that here to append this input. That will just make this helper function a little easier. And it will also help us create our next one, which is handle operator. Ignore everything on the right there. Handle operator. And this is going to receive an operator type. And it's going to create an operator input with the operator type that's passed in. Okay? It should be compiling in the background. Because of React 17's improved reloading, it actually maintains the state, interestingly enough, even through our errors there. So I'm going to hit plus, and that switches to 0. We need to talk about that in a moment. Now I'm going to hit 3. That changes to 3. And now I'm going to hit equals 15. Yes! It only took 3 hours to develop this calculator. That's 15. Now that is all of our basic, very basic operations here. We have not covered clear, all clear, and oops yet. We'll do that momentarily. But there is one thing I want to check. I don't think that this functionality is quite the functionality that a calculator normally has. So let's test this out. I can't clear, I have to refresh. Okay, if I hit 1, I get a 1. If I hit 1, I get a 1. Great. If I hit 2, I get a 2, or 12. If I hit 2, I get 12. If I hit plus, notice that value doesn't change. Whereas if I hit plus over here, my value reset to 0. So that's something we probably want to change in ours. So then 3 equals 15, 3 equals 15. Let's see if we can do that. So let's test this. Let's add yet another case. Now I'm really glad I made these tests. derives display value upon operator input. So we want to test if I enter 1, 2, add, instead of resetting the display to 0, I want to keep it at 12 like most calculators. So let me hit save. I'm expecting this test to fail. It does. Expected 12, got 0. Okay, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to implement that. Okay, so our get state is equals. Our default is our builder working value. What I might say is if our builder working value is 0 to display the last operation value, that would be one way to go about it. However, what happens in the calculator if I do, let's say 1, 2, plus, what happens if I hit 0 here? Okay, if I hit 0, it accepts that as an input and it resets the display. So I can't just check if the I can't just check if the working value is 0. What I might need to do is completely clear out the working value and really track if the working value is purposefully null, meaning we have not added anything. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to change this. Let me show you what's happening. Whenever you hit plus, that's an operator. If it's not equals, it comes down here and it resets the value to 0 along with the new operator. What I want to do is I want to say that this value is in fact null. It's purposefully null. It's empty. We know we haven't put in anything there yet. Now that's created a giant type situation for us, but that's because our working value requires a number as its value. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say that this is we want to make one of the props not required, and that is I am forgetting it off the top of my head once again. Okay, so I'm going to say operator, operation type, operator type, and then the value is going to be a number or null. Could be null. Okay. So let's see here. Let's see what's going on. Now it's really mad at me again. Okay, I really do need to figure this out. Let's see. Let me reset this back, put this back to 0. Now I'm wondering if, I don't know that I want to go through and change operation to have a nullable value, because that is a lot of null checks. What I could do is only, let's see, let me take a look at this. Okay, I may not have to change any of that. So the display should only display the last working value if the last input was not in operation. Okay, this may actually just be a one-line change here. Okay, so the display value, we're currently providing our working value, but let's do that only if our last input was a number. So I'm building up last operation here. Let me also build up last input. So I'm going to use my same format here to get the last one. I should probably just really make a helper function or pull in Lodash. Okay, so this is going to be an input or null. So if we have a last input and that last input's type is numerical, then display the working value. Otherwise, if it's not numerical, that means right now it's an operator. So we want to display the, actually I think the current total. So let's extract out the total up here. I think that's what we want. Okay, all of our tests pass. Let's see if it passes the smell test. Okay, 1, 2, 12, plus, it still says 12. That is the functionality we were looking for. Now if I hit 3, I'm wanting this to reset to 3. Excellent. If I hit equals, it should be 15. Yes. This is where you make a commit and call it a day and go home. But we're not going to do that yet. We have 2 more buttons to implement, and then we'll be done. We have the all clear button and the oops button. So let's, we're actually not going to do that in the calculator brain at all. We're done with the calculator brain. I think that's working now. I think. In fact, let me do, I haven't tested 2 equals yet. If I do a -5 here, do I get 10? Whew. That was a close one. Okay. Let us handle the all clear and oops. I'm going to handle this in the calculator component itself. I'm not going to make this a part of the logic. You could do that, but I think that'll be easier to do this in the calculator component itself. All clear. What all clear essentially means is we want to erase all the inputs and reset everything back to 0. So if I hit all clear right now, it doesn't do anything. So let me add an on-click handler, and we'll say handle all clear. We'll create a handler function for that. Handle all clear. Doesn't need to accept anything, and all it does is it sets the inputs to an empty array. So let's save that. Kind of needed an indicator if this reloaded. All clear, 0. Okay, excellent. Let me refresh. 1, 5, ... All clear. There we go, 0. That was easy. Okay, now oops. Oops may be just as easy. Let's see. let's do a similar thing here. On click handle oops. Now, if you're just joining or if you don't remember, the oops button is going to undo one input at a time. So no matter if you hit a number or if you hit plus minus or equals, you can hit the oops button and undo what you just did. So let's make a handle oops handler. Doesn't need to accept anything. And what this needs to do is it needs to take the inputs but remove the last one. And I want to do that in an immutable fashion. So we are going to set the inputs to whatever the previous inputs were, but we are going to slice or splice it. I'm pretty sure it's slice. We're going to start at 0, and I think we can do -1 to go to the second to last. It may be a -2. Let me see. So let's do that. So let me refresh. 1, 2, 3. If I hit oops, I want this to go back to 1, 2. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Yes. Okay. I think that's the calculator. I hope you had fun. This is 3.5 hours. But we've covered so many topics here. We've covered building this calculator UI using React, using style components, using CSS Grid. We've covered building up a calculator brain using really test-driven development or test adjacent development, perhaps. As we wrote our tests and the brain at the same time, we handled various cases. And then when we finally pulled it into the UI, we did find a few bugs, but for the most part, we weren't dealing with logic. All of the logic is really in the calculator brain, aside from the clear and the oops here. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you got something out of it. Let me know in the comments if you found this helpful and if you'd like to see more. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.